Namaste, heartily welcome to all our participants and viewers. Thank you for registering for our seminar today. Welcome Professor Ivan, welcome Peter Leach. Thank you so much for accepting to be part of this program. On behalf of Parampara Family Business Institute, it gives me great pleasure to have the fourth seminar hosted, symposium hosted today. We had 3 successful seminars in last 3 Saturdays, and we have 1,159 participants registered today from about 14 different countries, all the way from east to west. And we are looking forward to have an excellent conversation with all of you. Parampara Family Business Institute is a not-for-profit organization founded by Shri G.M. Raoji and his family to give back to the society about the concept of family business governance, and how it is important, because he believes whatever he has benefited, he wants to give it back to the society, and through which India, being a large country and predominantly family-run organizations and businesses, he wants them to benefit greatly. Hence, this institute is started. The topic of today is a very, very interesting and a special topic called the challenges for successors, managers or entrepreneurs. As we see, India is transitioning through a very unique stage where there is a generational transition taking place. While this transition is taking place, the previous generation is wondering how to design the successor for the next generation. I personally perceive and experience there are 3-dimensional complexities. Number 1, what is the business need? Number 2, what is the expectation of the previous generation that of the next generation? How do they want them to groom them? And the 3rd dimension is what is the intrinsic motivation, potential, and aspiration of the next generation itself. Keeping these 3 dimensions in mind, we are going to have a wonderful conversation in terms of hearing from the masters about this subject. Are there only 2 options or more options are there? That's going to be our conversation. But before that, may I request our founder chairman, Shri G.M. Raoji, to share his thoughts and few words on what he wants to share with all our participants. Over to you, Shri G.M. Raoji.
Yeah, namaste. Thank you very much, Ivan Lansberg. Thank you very much for accepting this. And Peter Leach and Tatwamasi Dixit. Hello, everyone. I welcome you once again to the 4th and final session of the first series of our learning journey on a family businesses. It pleases me to see that a thought few years back has manifested into this global learning platform of Parampara Family Business Institute. Parampara means tradition. It is a not-for-profit initiative of JMR Foundation. We shall continue this tradition of spreading the awareness and education on family governance. We have had a successful run of series of online sessions. In the first session on 18th July, we had Dr. Dennis Jeff speaks about his global research of 100 business families over the last 100 years. He found that generative families are built to last because they create holistic capital, not just a financial capital. In the second session on 25th July, we had Rachel Atkins and David Limson speaks about the rich experience and reputation management of family businesses globally. They found that next generation being active in social media are required to be smart in projecting themselves in digital media where the potential of building reputation gives. They play a big role in sustaining and growing the reputation of the family. In the third session on August 1st, we had that Ross Allen Hart speaks about his long field experience in mental health He found that fear of hope prevents people from changing because they are afraid of potential disappointment. It is important to discuss that fear to overcome it. Family legacy is built on two pillars: hope to overcome the fear of the unknown and the faith in one another. In the generative business families, next generation is the agent of change while continuing the family legacy. Today, we have another very interesting subject, the challenge of successors, managers, or entrepreneurs that Professor Ivan Lansberg, a globally reputed organization psychologist and senior faculty in several top universities. Badly planned succession is one of the most important reasons why many family firms do not survive through multiple generations. Succession planning at the time of the founder is very important. During founder's lifetime, the family must come together to agree on succession principles, process, and a policy inspired by a common vision. Succession is the litmus test of the family governance. I repeat, succession is the litmus test of the family governance. It is estimated that 49% of the founders are never willing to retire. 78% have not made any plans for succession. 37% are vague as how to manage the transition during the succession, and only 8% have the process ready. For effective succession, founder has to transition at three levels: personal, professional, and business. That is why it is not an event, but a structured process need to be planned effectively. There are three types of succession that should be planned for: business leadership succession, which is about preparing the next business leader; ownership succession, which is about planning for the ownership change of the family business; and a family leadership succession, which is about planning for the next leader of the family. It is very important to understand the factors that interfere with the succession planning and the way in which these three barriers can be constructively overcome to build an institution in perpetuity. This is where I welcome Professor Evan Lansberg to provide his valuable perspective on success in family business. Today is the last session of the first series, Essential Mantras for Family Businesses. However, this is just beginning. Parampara Family Business Institute will continue to present such a curated sessions by globally renowned experts in regular intervals. I'm sure this will benefit all business families, particularly in the medium and small enterprise segments. I wish you enjoy the learning session today. Thank you very much, Sanjay.
Thank you, GMRG, for your kind insight and your kind words. May I request my co-author, good friend Peter Leach, who is being regarded as the founding father of family business in UK, to introduce our good friend Professor Ivan today, who is going to share his valuable thoughts with us. Peter.
Thank you, Dixit ji. I'm thrilled to be here, and even more thrilled that Professor Ivan Lansberg has joined us. He is one of the key founding fathers of family business thinking globally, and he has been working with family businesses for many years. We've known each other for at least 30 years, and I've seen him operating all over the world. He teaches, he consults, and he's has his own firm with numerous colleagues and partners working with families all over the world. And he always comes up with amazing wisdom. And I've had the great privilege of working with him on a number of seminars. So it's brilliant for him to be here. Thank you, Ivan. And thank you for making this special effort, because there was a hurricane in Connecticut yesterday and the internet and the power was down. So he's had to drive quite a long way to get to the right equipment to be here. So a special thanks, Ivan.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure to be with all of you. And thank you, Dixie, for your kind invitation. I very much welcome the opportunity to have the conversation with both of you and our listening colleagues.
Okay, so what we're going to do today is there's no big presentation here. There's no PowerPoint. We haven't done this series like this. This is a conversation. And we're asking Ivan a number of questions, and we're going to let him just answer, and then we'll pick up a thread, and hopefully it'll be fascinating to hear some of his thinking. The subject is around succession and the idea of who are the successors? Are they entrepreneurs or managers? And actually, founders are always looking for next generation entrepreneurs. But sometimes that's almost becomes a negative if the next generation are not all entrepreneurs, and it can be quite demotivating for them. And I think it's really important to look at their strengths and weaknesses and how they complement each other. The fact is that many sibling relationships in business thrive because one sibling is more entrepreneurial or dynamic than the other, and the other is more managerial. And this can be a fantastic combination of balancing risk and opportunity. So many of the children of business families might make excellent managers of established and successful businesses, and they should not be made to feel undervalued around the contribution they can give. So my first question to you, Ivan, is how do you see families, business families, getting the best of the next generation? How do you avoid the sibling rivalry that entrepreneur-manager dynamic has on the next generation? And I think it happens all over the place, and I'm sure you've seen it. So I welcome your thoughts on this whole question of manager versus entrepreneur in the next generation.
Thank you, Peter. First of all, for me, one of the opportunities family enterprise offer is a actually broader platform of engagement than is typically seen, particularly by founding entrepreneurs. That is to say, the choice is not just between being an entrepreneur or being a manager. There's also, for example, the possibility of being what I would call, for lack of a better word, a governor, meaning somebody who has the maturity to be able to take the platform that was built and develop the stewardship skills necessary to create the conditions for the platform to continue and to evolve. And that is, in fact, a very different set of skills than you would find in the typical entrepreneur. Now, let me also offer, I have nothing but huge respect for entrepreneurs who start with nothing and build functioning organizations. It is a remarkable feat of human endurance and remarkable accomplishment. But usually the skills you need to build a business are actually quite different from the skill sets you need to both administer and consolidate a business, and especially the skills needed to govern a business effectively. So I'm saying this because, there is in psychology something we refer to as the availability bias. So we tend to look for what we know everywhere. Entrepreneurs know what they can do and use that pattern to try and assess the competence of their children. And then that becomes kind of the holy grail for everything else. My contention, in fact, my experience has been that this, again, if you break past that mold and begin to open yourself to an alternative set of skills, then the kind of complementarity you're alluding to in successful sibling teams can actually be harnessed in a much more effective way. And also, it provides a lot more, I think, a wider range of choice for the next generation to pick a path that allows them to sustain their relationship to the enterprise without feeling that they have to become someone other than who they are. Because, there's been a lot of writing as of the past few years out of how important authenticity is in leadership. And whenever you're trying to force a next generation to be something other than who they are, the possibility of them being able to bring to the opportunity the full the fullness of their character, as it were, the fullness of their talent, gets compromised unnecessarily. So let me pause it there, and then we'll explore more.
Yeah. I think the authenticity point is incredibly important, and your concept of governors means that you don't have to. Founders and promoters of businesses shouldn't look at it as a binary matter between entrepreneurs and managers. What you're saying is the governors is a very different but very crucial role, and you don't need to be as entrepreneurial as the elders if you're in a governor role, because it comes from a different place. But what happens truly if you have an entrepreneurially led business where in the next generation there is nobody who has really the entrepreneurial skills to deal with it because of the scale of the business, or indeed sometimes in a smaller business? What happens? What do you see happening in those circumstances?
Well, in the larger businesses, I think the challenge for the founding family, I would say, not just for the entrepreneur, is to create a governance infrastructure that allows for that platform to blossom without necessarily having family engagement at the level of management. And what does that mean? I mean, for example, having a board of directors at the level of a holding that has the kind of talent and independence of judgment to be able to provide and add value to the senior executives, even though they're not from the family. There are roles, when I'm talking about being a governor, I'm talking about, among other things, the family directors who may sit on that board, who are not entrepreneurs. They might not even be managers, but they are governors in the sense that they're able to assess how the values of that family are being translated into a strategy that represents and is deployed by management in a thoughtful and an impactful way. Those family members are also ambassadors of the enterprise in the outside world. So how do they conduct themselves out there? What ideas do they bring back from the outside world back into the board for deliberation, for exploration, for discussion in terms of opportunities and so forth? And how do they become over time good judgments of managerial talent? That becomes a skill in itself. So developing a next generation that is capable of earning the respect of independent directors that may sit on a board like this, who bring talents that are top-notch in terms of the quality, and yet are able to inject into strategic conversations the family's legacy, the family's values, the family's principles, so that those can then be synthesized and guide very real choices around what businesses do we go into, what acquisitions do we make, what businesses should we get out of because things have changed. How do we deal with issues of sustainability? How do we treat our people? How do we deal with the government, and how do we comply with laws? I mean, there are all sorts of ethical parameters and value parameters that are essential to the identity of any enterprising family that need to be brought into the discussion at that level. And then it's up to the board to oversee that the management is actually complying with the direction, the accountability, and the control that the board is providing. Let me just add one last thought. A very essential function of governors is also to hold the unity and commitment of the family as it goes through the generations to the enterprise and the platform that has been built. So there are responsibilities in the board, there are responsibilities vis-a-vis management, there are responsibilities vis-a-vis the outside world, and then indeed there are responsibilities upwardly towards the shareholders, towards the family, in keeping them committed, united, respectfully treated, and so forth and so on, while at the same time understanding the boundaries between owners, board, and management.
Yeah, I think that's really well put. In fact, I've got a great example of a family where in the next generation, there were various next generation members in G3 with different skills, one of whom was a professor of microbiology. And the family asked this gentleman to come on the board, and he said, "What do you want me for? I'm a microbiologist. I don't know anything about business." But I have to tell you, several years later, he asks the best questions, and he holds everybody to account by asking the best questions and doing exactly what you said, by bringing the legacy and the family's values to the table and keeping the board on track. So I absolutely get that. But in the main, families give up on, in my experience, a lot of families give up on their next generation if you don't have entrepreneurs and you don't have business people. But I think you and I are in violent danger of agreeing that you don't always have to have the entrepreneur in the next generation.
For sure.
Thank you.
It brings in a very good insight what you are saying, both of you are saying, that governors are the true custodians who have to manage all the stakeholders. And many a time what happens, the previous generation, if they are the founders and the true entrepreneurs, usually there is a psychological tendency to wanting to mirror themselves in their children. So the expectation is that of, if I am an entrepreneur, you have to be an entrepreneur because you are my son, you are my daughter, you are part of my genes. So that one expectation is one dimension which I just want to highlight, which puts a tremendous pressure on the next generation. Oh, am I also supposed to be an entrepreneur? Or how should I measure up to the success of my father, who has been tremendously successful? And the struggle with the successful first generation entrepreneurs is the control issues. They don't let go of the control. What has been your experience in this kind of a dynamics where, the father, without realizing and recognizing that, hey, there exists a concept of a governor, instead of training and molding my next generation to be a governor or a manager and entrepreneur, I'm always expecting them to be an entrepreneur. What is your view on that?
Well, let me just start with the idea of molding, which is, I think, a complicated one. But I think it, the way I've seen many entrepreneurs in my time, and some are, as parents, they are sculptors. They're like Michelangelo with a block of marble in front, and they have an idea of who the statue needs to become, and then they're chipping away at it, right? And in my experience, the more you are a sculptor, the more pushback you're going to get from the sculpture. Basically, the more you're going against the grain of respecting who they are as individuals. The alternative to sculpting is what I call gardeners. That there are people whose first job as parents is to understand who the children are, to discover who their children are. And do I have an apple tree, or do I have an orange tree, or do I have a pineapple tree? And then once you do that, your job is to help that apple tree become the best apple tree it can become. So you're not changing the essential nature of the individual. You're actually creating a context that allows for the individual to blossom and become who they can. When, one of the huge advantages of family enterprises is that they, as I said earlier, offer a variety of different paths for you to then, if you have an apple tree, like your microbiologist, for example, then you can begin to share with that individual the joys of having the platform and give them permission to engage in responsible ways in roles where they can actually add value, as opposed to trying to turn them into something that they're not. Because I think the moment you're going in that direction, then nature itself will fight you back. And it doesn't work very well.
I just want to pick up the thread of this sculptor versus a gardener. Sometime for every entrepreneur, businessman, their business is their first child.
Sure.
And they are expecting their other children to take care of the firstborn, which is the business, the sibling, in proper manner. So that's a huge expectation. That's one dimension. The other dimension here I want to highlight, in India, you will see there are hundreds and thousands of many family businesses spread across, and many of them are small and medium enterprises, of course a few large enterprises. In the large enterprises scenario, it is possible to design the governors. It's possible to have a situation where if somebody does not want to participate, you respect them. Yet you are an apple tree or you are an orange tree, I respect you. If you want to play guitar by the beach, it's perfectly all right. But whereas it's a small business or a medium business, and it requires entrepreneurship in the next generation, and you will agree with me, attracting a good CEO or a professional to a small or medium business is very challenging. It is very hands-on job, which gets passed on from generation to generation. It enforces the family business to be entrepreneurial in nature. How do you design, keeping the size of the business and the need of the business and the individual psyche of who they are? How do we apply this sculpting versus gardening balance?
Thank you. Yeah, in smaller businesses, first of all, I think you can still provide even a small version of governance in smaller businesses, just for the, and by governance, I again mean the function of providing direction, accountability, and control, and unity of ownership. Those are key functions. And I'm doing a study right now of tiny businesses in Colombia, in Latin America, sponsored by the Carvajal Foundation. And we're trying to see how, what are the characteristics of family enterprises that are actually vehicles for lifting people out of poverty? How do you harness familial entrepreneurship to provide that function? But one of the key features, to answer your question, is being able to extend the concept of family into the direction of your non-family employees in smaller companies. Because if you're able to pick, you don't need to bring world-class executives. Obviously, if you have access to them, that's great. But even in the context of a smaller company, being able to appreciate and nurture your non-family talent and being able to treat them almost as if they're members of your family, and then bring them as resources in what I would call the interregnum, meaning the time between the seniors' period of leadership and the next generation's involvement. Because if you got a loyal, competent group of non-family executives and they relate well to your family, then you're able to bridge the gap of between the generations without necessarily falling into the trap of forcing your next generation to do things that they might not be either suited for or even interested in. So whenever you're into that, I think the chances of failure go up remarkably. And let me also say, I am a huge advocate for family enterprises. I think they're a force for good in the world, in large, medium, and small. But they're not holy cows. They're not sacred. They need to evolve. And some families are not meant to be in business. And it's okay that they're not in business. So if the conclusion at the end of the tenure of the senior generation in a smaller or medium-sized company is that my kids are not interested, then you have an obligation to create the conditions for that business to continue under somebody else's ownership, and then sell the company, keep the wealth, and then find other ways of using the wealth that are both in alignment to Indian tradition, good for the community, but also good for your family. So it is, you know, being locked into a business forever, even if your heart is not in it, does not make for a good recipe for continuity.
Well, picking up that point, absolutely. I always look at it like this, that if an owner of a business is worried about, in any way, about the continuity of the business for the future and the ability of the family to do it, and he wants to take a risk that they might succeed, what he's effectively doing, and I should say he or she is effectively doing, is taking the whole value of the business and reinvesting it again in the business on the basis that to do that means they've taken the view that the best way to look after the family's wealth is to put it back in the business. And when people are challenged with that kind of question in a smaller enterprise, they suddenly realize that the wealth that the family needs to be separated from the business, and just putting it back at every intergenerational transfer can actually be very dangerous, as you must have seen over the years, like the rest of us.
For sure. You know, I agree completely. I mean, in fact, I think, you know, one of the advices I give to entrepreneurs is when you get towards the tail end of your tenure, you know, you have to protect yourself to make sure your personal wealth and your family's wealth is not totally interdependent on the decision making of the people that come after you. You know, the metaphor I use is, you know, if you're going to get out of the cockpit, get out of the plane, basically. Get off the plane, so that you put the risk where it belongs, which is with the people making the judgment calls on how the enterprise is actually running. And in order to do that, I think you need to disentangle your own wealth from the wealth in the enterprise. And I think that's just really, really critical.
Just one dimension, Peter and Ivan, I just want to share here, particularly in India, the identity of the entrepreneur is linked with their business. If it's not linked with their wealth, they feel hugely empowered, liberated, feel valued in the society, depending on what kind of an enterprise they have been running, not how much of the wealth they have in their bank. Because everybody has wealth, and so it's a tricky situation, and nobody wants to sell. You know, it's a good idea to sell sometime if your next generation is not ready, but in practice it doesn't happen at all.
I understand completely, and I believe me, I've seen up close what the effect of having your identity wrapped up into the business does, which I must say it is one of the strategic advantages of family companies, but that also has a risk, right? That you stay connected to the business past beyond your own capabilities. In fact, one of the problems we're seeing in a lot of our clients and families that we study is that, you know, longevity has now extended life, you know, science has extended the lifespan of people. So we are running into more and more situations where very senior people cross the line between not knowing that they're no longer functioning very well. And it becomes a very complicated and difficult issue for families because, you know, in many cultures, the seniors are revered, appropriately so. But, you know, I had a client that once told me, you know, his brother developed dementia. So then he told me, the brother who was the CEO told me, if I ever become like my brother, one of your most important functions is to tell me so. And then I told him, look, if we cross that line, no matter what I say, it's not going to be very helpful to you anyway. So your job is really to create the platform that allows for the business to lower its dependency on you. That is the challenge. And that's where governance and good succession planning comes in, right? So if we wait too long, then the leader doesn't know that he or she has lost their faculties. And that's a very tricky territory. And I think it's particularly tricky in cultures where seniority is so revered. Because, you know, how do you deal with a very senior person who's no longer at their prime? And what do you say to your father or your mother if that's the situation? It's just very, very difficult. So that's where institutional guardrails and the development of oversight that doesn't depend on one single individual becomes essential. And frankly, it becomes the biggest test of leadership because, you know, it's interesting. I mean, Peter and I sometimes have an opportunity to talk about that, but you know, I am 66 years old. I build a firm. My responsibility is to pass that firm on to the next generation of my colleagues. And it's a little bit like the biblical story of Moses, you know, where you are able to bring the people to the gateway of the promised land, and you have to plan for a situation where you know you're not going to be a part of. And that's the challenge. You know, he couldn't go into the promised land. So that you know, having the humility to be able to know in your own skin that your job is to create the conditions for the next generation to plan for a future that you're not a part of is really, I think, the biggest test of your commitment to continuity.
Couldn't agree more, 100%. And that is everybody's challenge when it comes to succession. And as you say, you're going through it yourself. But you mentioned earlier parenting, Ivan. And you know, when our kids are born, we don't get a guidebook that tells us how to do the parenting. And a lot of family businesses, the performance of the next generation is often sort of attributed to the quality of the parenting that they've had over many decades. And I know you've looked at this subject, and I know this is something that sort of that you're interested in. But what you know, in a family business context, there's no right or wrongs here. But do you have any sort of good guidelines or good tips and tricks and pointers for people around how do you, what does good parenting look like in a family business context? There's a sort of fairly open question for you.
Thank you. Yeah. Let me say, I've just finished a draft of a chapter that I've been invited to contribute to a book on precisely how do families, business families, engender entrepreneurs in the next generation. And I think some of the lessons that I try to distill in that chapter are built into what I see effective business families do. And let me just share a few. The first one, I think, is for the senior generation to model enjoyment of the work they do. You know, it's so often the case that, you know, when the senior members come back home at night and they sit with their families to have dinner, all they do is complain about what the day of, you know, the work day was all about. And the children grow up listening to all of these ongoing, you know, complaints, and, you know, you wouldn't believe what my customers did, or my executives, or my brother who works with me, or whatever. And then at some point when the kids come of age, they turn around and say to the kids, you know, come and work for me. And then the kids who have been hearing, you know, 15 years or 20 years of this constant complaining ask themselves, so why would I want to submit myself to all that torture? You know, and so business families that do a good job on this front are able to actually share the joy of their work life. They talk about what you know, and they bring the children into the conversation around problem solving. You know, if they have something, they share it at the dinner table, and then the kids have input. You know, the most brilliant entrepreneurs I've seen in my life recruit the next generation on very targeted issues that they're struggling with. You know, I'm reminded of of a client of mine who was in retail, and he had a problem because his store was in a brilliant location in the town in which they live, but it couldn't expand anymore. And the lines behind each cash register got very long. So one time, and he kept talking about this problem and with his executives and everything else. One time his wife and his daughter went to get him a gift in another town, and they saw this store that had come up with a solution on how to fit 2 cash registers in the space of one, basically, with narrower lines and so forth. And the daughter, who was 15, saw this and immediately said to the mother, this is the solution to Dad's problem. And then she came back home all excited, told her father, drew the solution on a piece of paper. The father was just taken aback, said, yes, this is it. So the next time the father met with the executives, he asked the daughter to come and present the solution. The executives were a little bit embarrassed, that they hadn't come up with it themselves. But I tell you, within 2 weeks, the store had been remodeled using the idea that the daughter brought. Today, 15 years later, she went off, she worked in the company, she went off to get her MBA at a top university, worked for somebody else for a number of years, and then came back, and she leads a division of what's now a multi-business business now. Totally committed. But she goes back to that moment when her father invited her to think about an issue that was very real. She came up with a solution. The solution was the right solution, and then it was implemented. Now, she couldn't wait to get off the school bus every day to go and see how her solution was being implemented in the company. And so the concept that within a family, you're able to share the burden, but at the same time, the opportunity that the business offers with your children. And most importantly, to be able to listen to their input when it's valuable and actually do something with it. That's the biggest signal you could ever give the next generation about what fun it is to actually be engaged in business. And let me just segue to, one of my windows into India has been through my students over the years, both at Yale and at the Kellogg School. And I can tell you, some of my most brilliant students have been from India. And one of the issues that invariably comes up, and I'm sure, Peter, you have your own version of this at your university at Imperial, one of the issues that invariably comes up at the tail end of their studies is now I have to go back home. I've been pumped up for 2 years with all of these great ideas about management and how to deal with strategy and how to deal with finance and how to deal with production issues and all of it. And now I have to go and face my parents and tell them what I've learned. And I'm very worried that I'm just going to be cast aside, told to be obedient. And when I see things that are actually not working, or when I have ideas of a better way of doing them, will they ever listen to me? Will I get the space to add value to the company in ways that are meaningful and purposeful? So families that are able to groom effective next gens are able to create the conditions for those conversations to happen effectively. And for the senior generation to have the humility to say, I actually have something to learn from my children. And I will say to you, just in closing, my biggest teachers in life have been my children. They have taught me so much about the way, the life works, about what is it that one can and cannot influence as a parent, what are the limitations as well. And how do you transition from being a sculptor to being a gardener, a respectful gardener? I think that to me is just essential.
That's absolutely great. But in a very hierarchical society, and Dixit will I'm sure have a view. A lot of the time, either the children don't want to say anything because they don't want to be wrong again. And even if they do say something because they're encouraged to, they might get you know, the elders might not even listen or might not want to hear from them, and often don't ask. And so it's almost countercultural to share that kind of discussion. I don't know what you think, Dixit.
Yeah, I mean, India is a very hierarchical society. You know, when I look at any family business, Ivan and Peter, it's we have to look at in two dimensions. One is what the family's DNA is all about, and what society in which you are operating. And society uniquely brings in, if you look at Indian society, it is a very hierarchical society, like any other, many few other societies. And it's also a family-led economy. This country, if you notice, the family has been given a lot of importance. In fact, you will notice when I studied the family businesses and SMEs in India, in many smaller parts of India, very good business, great entrepreneurs, but they do not want to expand their business to a India scale or global scale because they do not want to be away from their family. They want to be close to their family. They barter their happiness for their family, to be with their family rather than just keep growing. But you know, it is so therefore what happens, talking to elders, it's a very specific skill I feel one has to develop if you are in part of a hierarchical society. And if you are able to have, it's not an adult to adult conversation, but you are still a child to your parent, even if you are a 50-year-old. But if you are able to offer some wisdom and a careful conversation, yes, it is possible to definitely get across to your father and uncles in the senior generation. Let me ask you one question, Ivan. In these three areas, we spoke about governors, entrepreneurs, and managers. Is entrepreneurship, uh, is it genetic or can it be cultivated? I know it's very wrong to ask a professor this question. It's probably unfair. You have been teaching entrepreneurship, but I'll be very interested to hear your views on this.
Thank you. Actually, there is some research that says that there is a genetic component to entrepreneurship, but we can, you know, that is something to think about. My own experience, though, is that true entrepreneurs don't come one generation after the other. There's usually a skipping of generations, or so for most business families that I've been in contact with, the issue is really about, as a colleague of mine, John Ward, often says, is how do you create a tradition of change? Meaning, how do you allow yourselves to elevate the purpose of your family as an enterprising family? And I would put the emphasis on family, that you know, because entrepreneurship is, in the West, we glorify the Bill Gates or the, you know, Steve Jobs of the world. But even if you look at their stories, you know, there are all sorts of familial inputs that went into creating Bill Gates. You know, he talks about the influence of his mother on his character, and you know, so there are, you know, they're not isolated from the familial context within which they were spawned, as it were. Now, I do think that entrepreneurship, there are certain things about entrepreneurship that can be taught to families, that if they do them well, the probability of being able to harness entrepreneurship within the family go up. I mentioned one, you know, how do you share the joy of actually running a business, not just the burdens? Another one is, how do you respect the business as an entity, you know, that it isn't just a piggy bank where we dip our hands into and take money out. It is an organization with people who have themselves families. There are customers to whom you're responsible. There are suppliers towards whom you're responsible. So it's how do you move from just treating it as a personal asset to treating it as an institution? becomes part of the big questions that owners have to contend with. And believe me, I think every owning family needs to ask themselves, again, back to the issue of selling, are we the best owners for this company? And that's a key question. And in what way do we as owners add value to the platform that we've been inheriting? But other dimensions, I think that can be taught. Another one is permission to dream. You know, entrepreneurial families are wonderful at cultivating the aspirations of the next generation, and not treating the company as if it were fixed. Most enterprises that last across generations evolve. And if they evolve well, the evolution is driven by the aspirations of the people that follow. So being able to take those aspirations, treasure them, nurture them, connect them to the enterprise in ways that are appropriate, whether at the level of governance or at the level of management, creating opportunities for the next generation to take measured risks. You know, so you don't have to hand them over the entire enterprise. You can create an opportunity around a new product, for example, and let them run with it and see what they can do. So you can create boundaries around entrepreneurial activity to put your children to the test. Because there is another point, and then I'll stop, which is, you know, one of the first family business consultants in the world, in the Western world certainly, was a man by the name of Niccolo Machiavelli. And he wrote a little book called The Prince. And one of the principles that he espouses in The Prince is that if you get power easily, you have a very hard time holding on to it. If you get power through a long, arduous road that tests you, that allows you to show what it is that you got to offer, it's a longer ramp up, but by the time you get it, you can hold on to it much, much better. And one of the other things that Machiavelli does is that he distinguishes power from authority. Power is your capacity to influence people, whereas authority is your right to influence them as viewed by them. They give it to you. It's not something your parents can give you. You have to earn it. And earning that ability that right to influence people requires you to take some risks. It's very hard to earn authority without exposing yourself to the risk of failure. And a lot of the time, parents are very protective of their children and don't want to put them in positions where they can show what they have to offer. Because, you know, if they fail, then it's an embarrassment for the family, and what am I going to do, and so forth. But it's just like teaching your son or daughter to ride a bicycle. Someday you have to take the wheelies off, and you know that they're going to, you know, have a few accidents. You know it, and they can learn to ride the bike without having the accidents. So it takes real discipline as a parent to take the wheelies off, stand on the sidelines, and let them learn the way life teaches us the lessons, which is through adversity.
You know, what happens in many families, the parents use the power to control the next generation. And they are very much aware that they are using this power. And sometimes it is not just, I am a senior person, therefore I have a power. But it's also, I have the control of all the shares in my hand. So therefore, I am sitting in a very powerful seat. So if you don't listen to me, then, you know, I have many choices and I keep giving you lots of subtle hints. You better fall in line. You know,
Sure.
This is a very typical controlling behavior many families exercise. What is your advice for them? And with this kind of a controlling attitude, they can never have a wisdom being transferred to the next generation at all. It's going to be extremely difficult because there's a fear which comes in the relationship between them. where there is a power equation is playing. How do you help them transition? What is your experience for the senior generation or the next generation who are struggling with their seniors who are being victimized by this power equations? Because there are very few people who are wise.
Yeah, I agree with you. In my observation of family companies, I'd love to hear what Peter has to say about this too, is that there is a kind of ebb and flow across what I call the three circles, the family, the enterprise, and then the ownership. And when transitions happen, the first thing that gets transferred is managerial, power. Or managerial responsibilities, let's put it that way. The next thing that gets transferred, often many years later, is the actual ownership responsibilities and ownership and legal ownership. And actually, the last thing that gets transferred is familial authority, and particularly in societies like India or China or places in Latin America or the Mediterranean countries in Europe. Where that's happened in the US, for example, when Thanksgiving dinner or Christmas or the holidays are no longer at the parents' house, they're now at the children's house. That when that's happened, that something important is changing the family itself. But to your point, to your question, there are many challenges with transferring ownership power basically to the next generation. I think the fear that if it's a little bit like King Lear, if I divide the kingdom before I'm gone, will my daughters rip it apart? And that is a real fear in some families. If you've done your job right, though, I think it is a very important moment that can be celebrated, institutionalized, and it's the ultimate test of whether you've created the kind of platform that is sustainable beyond you. For you to have peace of mind while you're doing that, the point that we made earlier is very important, which is, make sure that you're off the plane. Make sure your personal wealth is secure before you do this handoff on the enterprise. And then find other ways of enriching your identity. For example, through philanthropy. Lots of entrepreneurs. Bill Gates built Microsoft. But today, what wakes him up at night is not Microsoft, is his foundation. So his identity is now being totally redeployed in a new arena where he's doing great good to the world, and he can invest all of his entrepreneurial energy into creating one of the world's leading philanthropic institutions. And thank God for him. It's just a remarkable gift to humanity as far as I'm concerned. But that's a wonderful example of somebody who was able to redeploy, keep his identity front and center, and then do something extraordinary. And then it gets me to the last point, which we had discussed in prior conversations as well, which is, how do you as a senior leader transition from exercising your influence from a source of authority, meaning because you hold the shares, because you have the right roles, and evolve yourself into exercising your influence through a position of wisdom? And for me, that is truly the ultimate accomplishment of a leader, because you're now having the wisdom of mostly listening, but knowing when to intervene to convey some ideas, to be able to harness the value of your many years in doing these things. And if you've trained your next generation well, they'll be in sync with you in being able to harness that wisdom in great opportunities. Let me give a concrete example. A chairman of a very large company in Europe ultimately retires, passes down his shares, continues involved in the family council of the family, right? And when issues come up, and I mean very meaningful issues, like how do we deal with our providers and customers during the pandemic, and what sacrifices are we willing to do, and how do we tell the shareholders that we have to cut the dividend to be able to keep the business alive, right? He's able to refrain himself from intervening, waits for others to come to him, asks him the questions, and he then, knowing what the right answers are, provides some ideas, but then pipes those ideas to the right forums where those decisions need to be made. Because he knows that if he just comes out from the back stage, back to the center stage, and starts taking command of all of it, his system's ability to grow gets compromised. He just reinforces the dependency of his system on him. And he's got the willpower to put the brakes on himself and then to honor the institutional framework that he has built. But he's able to know when to give input and when to not give input and let the system learn. And it takes great courage to do that, and no question about it, no question about it. But it's I think great wisdom is a lot about restraint, about keeping your mouth shut, keeping your ears open, being available when called for, and allowing those who are going to have to live with the consequences of their decision to be engaged in the challenges at hand.
Call for a letting go attitude.
It's exactly that. Yeah.
Okay, we're fast running out of time. We've had a few questions in. I just wanted one of them came in saying, should ownership be aligned to management succession in mid-sized family businesses? I think you've sort of answered that. I think you pretty much answered that. There's another question where going back to the sibling partnership idea of siblings working together. And the member who's written the question talks about some of the recent cases of fighting with siblings in India. And the question is, what factors are mainly responsible to break up a family enterprise and cause these people to become bitter rivals? In your experience, Ivan, why do people do that? Is there a magic reason for that? Or is it just, something that happens over time?
I think that the tail end of sibling partnerships is particularly challenging. And I see a lot of sibling partners who have worked together reasonably well. Every sibling partnership has its strains and pulls and pushes. But if they got the will to sustain their relationship over, say, 20 years or even 15 years of engagement, at some point as they begin to look at their children, the relationship is challenged even further. And I believe that the only answer to that is really good governance. There is no way around it. And for example, being able to move past the straitjacket of family branches and beginning to look at the family as a total one unit and look for talent from wherever it may come, because talent is not always distributed equally across family branches. So the strength of the familial bond ultimately is a little bit like in building construction. It isn't just the horizontals and the verticals, it's the diagonals. So when you have a brother or sister who can support a nephew or niece because they appreciate what they have to bring, more in the context of management than their own children, you know that the family has reached a level of maturity that will allow them to make the crossing from siblings to cousins, as it were. But sibling partnerships are inherently complex systems. They require a set of ingredients to work well. They need to have a common vision. They need to have an appreciation for something you mentioned, Peter, at the beginning, which is a appreciation of the complementarity of skills that they bring. No sibling partnership has equal skills across the board. You have somebody who is an entrepreneurially driven individual focused on the company, another one who's a strategist, another one who's a, human, with high EQ, as it were, another one who is a quantitative, person focused on the finances. And it's the complement of all of those skills together that allows for the sibling partnership to really excel. And they do need the capacity to know how to problem solve and how to deal with their inherent rivalries that are a part of every sibling system. So when I see the cases, and I have tracked some of Indian sibling partnerships that fall apart, it, first of all, is truly disheartening, because you feel at some point you wonder, are these folks not able to put the institution above their own selves and worry about the lives of all of those employees and all of those customers and the responsibility, and feel the weight of the responsibility they have over the institution again. And it's often tragic. I mean, it speaks to, and I'll stop, many entrepreneurial families focus on the risks below the CEO, and not sufficient attention is given to the risks above the CEO. The risks of sustaining their unity, their commitment, investing in educating the owners to understand and appreciate and respect the platform that has been built, and treat it as a kind of sacred privilege. How many people in this earth have the opportunity to impact the lives of other people quite the same way? And conveying that sense of accountability and responsibility to themselves and to society matters hugely, I think.
There's one invisible dimension to the sibling fallings apart. If the parents are the invisible link, if they play a great role, they can always bring the siblings together.
I would like to think that too. Yeah.
You hope.
One hopes.
We're certainly running over time. We've had quite a lot of questions in, and we're going to be answering them offline. So please don't be worried about it. I didn't really want to stop Ivan's flow because it's been so fascinating. But I'd just like to ask you to end, Ivan, with one question, and you can answer this in any way you like. But if you're giving advice both to an elder generation and a younger generation, what would you say were the key things to make succession work between the generations? You mentioned about the third generation avoiding the branches and flattening the structure, and that's very common today. It happens a lot. But in terms of the succession from one generation to another, one of the questions that did come in was, what are the elements of building trust in a succession? So what key points would you give, or would you advise people to consider when starting this journey? Because it's a journey, because it's a process, it's not an event.
Thank you. No, that would be my first answer, which is it's a process, always, not an event. And if you've done things right, you've been cultivating the system so that it can handle the transition effectively. But in terms of sort of very quick pointers, first and foremost, make sure that succession is always driven by your vision of the future. So inevitably, whenever you're thinking about continuity, the first question you have to address is continuity into what? What does that promised land look like? And can I bring the owners into alignment so that we agree about what the destination is going to look like? Because succession ought always to be driven strategically in service of a place you're trying to get to. But articulating that place, thinking about the system 10 years from now, as an enterprise, first and foremost, as an ownership group, add 10 years to everybody's lives and look at that picture carefully. And as a family, what aspirations do you have? And can we create a process where we can come together to think that through and clarify that? The moment that is, and that to me, frankly, is the heaviest part of the lifting. Once that is clear, then all sorts of work streams in support of getting to that destination can be put into place. You can use it to assess what kind of governance do you have and what kind of governance you need to put in place. You can use it to think about what kind of management the business that you are aspiring to build will require, not the business that exists today, the one you want to build, right, going forward. What are the skill sets you need in that? You can use it to begin putting in place opportunities to develop your next generation and test them. And the testing, as I was saying earlier, is critical because the last thing you want is to put yourself in a situation where you're making succession choices without data. I'm huge on data. If you walk into the newsroom of certain clients of mine that are in the media business, there's a big sign that says, "In God we trust, but everybody else bring data." I believe that for succession planning, you need that too. You need to make sure your successors have a track record of excellence, that by the time the choice needs to be made, it's a no-brainer. Everybody knows where the talent is, and you've documented it, you've tested it, and now the handoff can happen in a smooth way. And then the last point is really to have the humility for the senior generation to understand that your job is to lower, not increase, lower the dependency of the company on you. And that is, again, finally, to me, the greatest test of greatness is whether you can bring yourself to have the humility to know that your job is not to reinforce the dependency, is to lower it and ask yourself, what would happen today if I left? If I passed away today, what are the consequences for my family? What are the consequences for my board? What are the consequences for the company I've built? And if you look at that with some degree of honesty, your work gets cut out for you. You know exactly what it is that you need to do to accomplish the ultimate challenge, which is to pass it on to your children in a responsible manner.
Fabulous. Thank you, Ivan. What a brilliant discussion, and how privileged we all are to be here listening to your wisdom. We could do this for another few hours, but I think we've overrun a little bit, which I took some license to do, which I hope is all right with everybody. Absolutely. But thank you so much for spending the time with us. And Dixit ji, you might want to make any.
So some conversations you want to end quickly, and you are just waiting, oh God, when it's going to end. And some conversations you are saying, oh my God, we have so less time. How are we going to cover all the subjects we wanted to actually discuss? I mean, to all the audiences, we actually we could cover only 50% of what we actually wanted to share with all of you. But I'm sure we will get one more opportunity to have a lovely conversation with you. And thank you so much for putting all your time, effort, and energy to be with us. And on behalf of Parampara Family Business Institute, Shri G.M. Raoji, and all our Indian audience who have been eagerly listening to you, I thank you. Thank you, Peter, for all your wisdom, help, and support. Thank you so much.
Thank you both. It's been a privilege to be with you.